It's my pleasure to introduce my guest today, performer and music historian Dr. Giorgio Sanguinetti. Sanguinetti teaches at the University of Rome Tor Vergata. He gives classes and seminars in many prestigious European and American institutions, such as the Orpheus Institute in Ghent, the University of Leuven in Belgium, the Schola Cantorum Basiliensis in Switzerland, the NUI in Maynooth, Ireland, the CUNY Graduate Center in New York, Northwestern University, Indiana University in Bloomington, and Boston University. For the winter semester of 2012, he taught at the Schoolish School of Music at McGill University, Montreal. He was the organizer of the 7th European Music Analysis Conference in Rome 2011. He has written several articles and essays on the history of Italian theory from 18th to 20th century, Schenkerian analysis, analysis and performance, form in the 18th century music, opera analysis, and has worked intensively in the rediscovery of the Italian Partimento tradition. In 2012, Oxford University Press published his book, The Art of Partimento, History, Theory, and Practice. In my view, an essential book in your library if you're interested in Partimento. Dr. Sanguinetti is also a moderator on the fast-growing public Facebook group, The Art of Partimento. Dr. Sanguinetti, it's my honor to welcome you to the show.
Well, thank you. It was very flattering introduction.
Before we dive in, would you be able to tell me a little bit about your musical background?
Oh, yes, that's interesting because it has something to do with my interest in Partimenti. I am not a Baroque musician. I was trained as a classical pianist, and I graduated in composition after I quit my performing career. And then I moved to music theory and analysis, and I spent a wonderful time studying in New York with Carl Schachter. And at that time, it was the early 90s, I think. Yes, I was interested in Schenkerian analysis. And so I discovered Partimenti, but this is probably the next question.
Okay, so let's dive into Partimento now. So I've asked quite a few people about this, but can you tell me, why did this tradition die out and end up being replaced by the more typical harmony and counterpoint courses that we see in conservatories today?
This happened because the Italian music theory tradition during the 19th century was considered somehow out of date and old-fashioned, and because of the growing fame and growing importance of German music theory. So even Italians considered the Partimento tradition something you don't have to speak about anymore. I remember how I discovered Partimento is quite a funny story because it was at the time of my first appointment as an adjunct professor at University in southern Italy in Calabria. And one of my mentors and teachers suggested me, well, why I was teaching harmony and counterpoint. So I was thinking about, Salzer Schachter and Holdwell and Schachter, Harland was leading because that was I studied this and was in New York. And so my friend and teacher, Professor Zino, he told me, why don't you teach Fenaroli instead? I mean, this is a joke. Fenaroli is something so old, so old-fashioned. So right. Didn't even remember who was this Fenaroli guy anymore.
Did you know Fenaroli when you were in Italy? Was that a name that people knew?
Not really. Maybe some old musicians, old masters. In the 70s, when I studied at the conservatory, maybe some old teachers still studied Fenaroli, but was really something old-fashioned. I remember when I was studying in the Conservatory of Milan, the big hit was Schoenberg, the harmony era. Schoenberg harmony era was considered the modern stuff. In truth, it's not modern at all because Schoenberg wrote it in 1911. But
that's right.
Very smart thing to do because it was scientific and modern. So yes, nobody really. Maybe someone in Naples, in the Conservatory of Naples. I'm not a Neapolitan, and I studied in Milan and in northern Italy. But somehow in the Conservatory of Naples, some old masters, they still taught Fenaroli, maybe.
That's amazing. So you're saying even in Italy, with the home of where it is, it was starting to fade away.
It faded away a long time ago, I think, because especially, in the after the unification of Italy, Naples lost many things and lost importance in the national perspective. So Milan became the modern city, and because it had the big theater, and Naples also has a big theater, but Milan had a growing and very powerful publishing industry. Ricordi, all the great music publishers were in Milan. The Conservatory of Milan became the modern conservatory in Italy, and it was modeled initially after the Conservatoire de Paris. So recorded the publishing Ricordi, they started to translate into Italian all the modern treatises and handbooks and manuals written for the Conservatoire de Paris. During more or less the 1850 or something like that, the growing influence of German music theory made that Ricordi started to translate from German into Italian some of the most important for that period treatises from German school, for example, Richter or Samuel Jadasson. That was translated. Not so much Riemann. Riemann functional harmony didn't really have a grasp in Italian music theory.
So you're talking about Hugo Riemann, is that right?
Yes, Riemann.
Okay, wow, that's interesting. That it's funny that you mentioned that, because the Paris Conservatory, and this absolutely blew my mind, would you say it was heavily influenced when it was founded by this Italian Partimento tradition?
Yes, in Paris they had a very strong influence from Naples. I mean, the Paris Conservatory was in some way modeled after the ancient Neapolitan Conservatories, but in turn, it influenced the Conservatory of Milan, who became the most modern conservatory in Italy.
It's almost like a circle,
It's a circle, yes, exactly.
When you consider the Prix de Rome, so why did the French feel like traveling to Italy was a grand prize for a competition-winning student?
The Prix de Rome was really intended for art, for young artists, painters, sculptors, musicians came later. And actually, Rome was probably not such an exciting city for young musicians at the times of Debussy, who seems to be quite bored of his period. Because Paris was much better.
Right. So can we pinpoint, so you're saying about the middle of the 19th century, that's when Partimento started to get replaced by the more quote-unquote modern sensibilities?
Well, this is a very interesting document coming from an academy of music theory that existed in Florence about the middle of the 19th century. And the Florentine Academy was led by an amazing figure of musician, music theorist, musicologist. It was Abramo Basevi. You probably know his name because he wrote a very important book on the analysis, probably the first book, the first book on the analysis of Verdi's operas. And Basevi was an amazing man and was interested in a lot of things. He was a music theorist. He wrote 2 treatises on harmony, and it was a blowing mind, really. And he established an academy of music theory in Florence. So something that doesn't exist, not yet. I'm not sure. But it existed in Florence. And one of they gathered about every month or something like that, and they had some question to answer. And one of these questions was, would it is better to study harmony or counterpoint, like the ancient Italians did, so starting from practice? Or would it be better to study like Germans today do? So they start from theory. So theory or practice first. And this is very interesting because the answer pointed out that the Neapolitan system was unbelievably efficient, even though nobody really knew how it worked, because the Neapolitan master tended to keep everything secret. So they say they wrote very little, they wrote just exercises, and they probably knew a lot about the theory of harmony, but they didn't wrote anything about the theory of harmony. So it's just a sort of secret knowledge, esoteric knowledge that passed through generation and through direct teaching.
Well, that's right. It's been mentioned that this tradition, it was an oral tradition, and much of that living tradition was lost because we don't have the living masters alive today who transmitted that information. But let me ask you this. Isn't it also true that there is plenty of archival material available in these Naples Conservatory libraries, but they're Partimenti manuscripts? Is that right?
Oh, yes. The Neapolitan library still has an unbelievable amount of manuscript material. But what I want to point out that material are just the exercises. So nothing written. You cannot find a treatise that tells you, you have to do this, and you have to do this, and you have to do this. The only rules, they call that rules or regulae, they only concern the realization of unfigured bases. So when you have a baseline and you don't have figures, so you have to find out the chords. So they invented a system that you could imagine the chord you have to place on this bass note. But that's all. But okay, it would be fine had the Partimenti been only on figure basis, but more advanced Partimenti, they are not on figure basis, but only on figure basis. I mean, they are Partimenti changing clef.
That's right.
7 clefs. Some change all 7 clefs, and you have Partimenti when you have to add a bass line beneath a top line. So it's unbelievably intricate. But you don't have any rule, any written explanation, nothing. You have just to, as I tried to do in my book, to figure out what we have to do with this kind of secret knowledge.
Do we have Italians alive today, like old masters who know this, or is it like extinct?
I'd say that it is extinct. It is extinct in the way it was practiced in the 18th century, because Partimenti continued to be used even in the beginning of the 20th century. They still printed Fenaroli. But the fact is that the real importance of Partimenti is that you had to play them, not to write them. So toward the end of the 19th century, the realization of Partimenti became a written skill. So you have this baseline and you write the realization. But in the 18th century, you didn't have to write the realization, but to play it on the keyboard. And this changes everything because it gives you a fluency and a rapidity and an instinctive reaction. I mean, I'm sure you are a player. You're an instrumentalist, I'm sure. So you know that when you play your instrument, you don't have to think, oh, now I have to put my finger here and then right. My finger here. It is a matter of instinct. So composition in the 18th century for someone who grew up in the Neapolitan school and elsewhere as well, it was a matter of instinct.
Now, we know that they spent 10 years from a very young age, and then
Yeah.
they really grew, like you said, in fluency. Now, can we actually break up those 10 years? I know that it said that you have to sing first for 3 years before you can even touch an instrument. So in those remaining 7 years, how would I know fugues are right at the end, but how would they progress? What was the natural progression for a Partimento training?
I'm afraid we don't know enough to answer completely this question. As an educated guess, I'd say that they started singing, that's right, because one of the rules of the Neapolitan Conservatory was if you can't sing, you can play. So they started singing, and they studied Partimento probably at the same time with counterpoint. So they are two faces of the same thing. With Partimento, you gain the fluency, the rapidity. With written counterpoint, you learn a more sophisticated way to lead the voices. So avoiding parallel octave, for example, which are very common in Partimento playing. Very often you play parallel octaves, and they didn't care much about this. But they did care when you wrote down the counterpoint exercises. Problem with counterpoint exercises is that paper was quite expensive. So they used instead what they call a cartelle. Cartelle were a pad of litter, made with litter. So they canceled they wrote down the exercises in this cartella, in this pad, and after that they canceled it and wrote it again. So what we have is we have some counterpoint exercises, but not very much. No, not really much. And one other interesting thing is that they had to do what we call the free composition.
So is that like fantasias and that sort of thing?
And not really. Most often, that was sacred music. The real business in the Neapolitan Conservatory was sacred music because there was a lot of churches. And so they mostly composed sacred music. And this is why counterpoint was so important, because they had to write fugues in a very, very clever way. And the other thing was solfeggi. So solfeggio was not the solfege we intend today, but was a written exercises for voice and continuo without words. So sing at an aria without words. And solfeggio were used to teach singers, and also as the first step toward free composition. So I imagine that the student or figliolo, when he entered at 10 years age in the conservatory, they started singing. Then they started with Partimento, then the counterpoint, then the first attempt to free composition were solfeggi. And then they moved to more complex and more sophisticated composition, but mainly was sacred music. The relationship between the conservatories and the opera house was quite complicated because the opera house always wanted the student of the conservatory to come and study and perform in the opera house, but the governors of the conservatory were afraid that, meeting that young women in the opera house that could in some way disrupt the discipline in the conservatory were not happy.
Okay, do we have marked exam papers? How do we know that they conducted tests or exams? Do we have papers with failing grades, passing grades in these conservatories?
Yes, we have. The most important exam in the conservatory was the promotion from young student to assistant student or graduate student. So in Naples it was called mastricello, that means little young master. So they had some kind of pyramid, and at the top it was the great maestro, like Durante or Leo. The great maestro didn't teach to children. He only taught to great students, so to advanced students. In turn, advanced students they taught small children. But you have to pass an exam to become a mastricello, young master, and we have some of the written proofs, the written exam. I think that Bob Gerdingen wrote a wonderful paper on the counterpoint exam made by a famous composer, Gaspare Spontini, who was rejected, by the way.
Ooh.
He didn't pass. He didn't pass.
And can we look at that exam? Did it look tough? What was the exam look like?
Fuchs. He made a small mistake in the answer of the subject. That was a terrible mistake.
Okay. Okay, so were all the teachers in these conservatories, and there was not just one, there was something like 4, right?
The first teacher was the most important. Is like a dean or the press director of the department. He taught composition or counterpoint, for sure, counterpoint, and the most advanced stuff. Then was a teacher for Partimento, and then a teacher for singing. The lowest rank was teacher of instruments, especially brass instruments, wind instruments. They were not very considered.
Were all the teachers in these conservatories unified in their understanding of this method? In your book, you note several different variations to cadences and the rule of the octave. So were they all different in slight variations?
I think that variation depends on the period, on the age of the teacher. Because, during the 18th century, very often the same teacher could teach in different conservatories. So I'm not sure that there was a specificity of one of the 4 conservatory versus the other conservatory, because the teacher, they very often change or took 2 or 3 different positions at the same time, and obviously they taught the same time. So probably it's a matter of time. So the Fenaroli rule of the octave is different from the Durante rule of the octave, because Durante was the teacher of Fenaroli, and it was a generation earlier. So in different generation, they devised probably different rules of the octave. And then there were some very fancy rule of the octave written by different composers. For example, there's a totally crazy rule of the octave written in a manuscript by Niccolo Porpora. There's a single manuscript of Partimenti by Porpora was discovered in the library of the Conservatory of Milan. Oh, by the way, and the Conservatory of Milan has one of the greatest collection of Neapolitan Partimenti, beside Naples.
And you mentioned Niccolo Porpora. He's Joseph Haydn's main teacher, actually, and he's a pure Neapolitan master. Did Haydn probably get the pure Partimento treatment?
Probably. Haydn was a famous letter of Haydn in his autobiography, and he wrote in this letter that he learned everything about music, or the most important thing he learned about music were taught by Maestro Porpora in Vienna. Haydn was a sort of valet of Porpora, and he played the harpsichord during Porpora singing lessons. And Porpora was a student of Gaetano Greco, who was one of the most important first-generation Partimento composer. So, I will be surprised to learn that Haydn didn't know anything about Partimenti, because...
Okay, I'm curious about Bologna now, because Bologna, we have Giovanni Battista Martini, also known as Padre Martini, very famous. He taught Johann Christian Bach, the son of Johann Sebastian Bach. Leopold Mozart, Mozart's father, consulted with him for his son Wolfgang's training. Bologna has produced some pretty big names, like Rossini, Verdi, Respighi, Donizetti. So how was Bologna different from Naples in music education?
We have only one manuscript of Partimenti with the name of Martini. And it's not in the main library of Bologna, but it is in the library of Modena, the Libreria Estensa, Biblioteca Estensa in Modena. And this is just one example. But of course, the main bulk of Bolognese partimenti are those by Martini students, Padre Mattei. Padre Mattei, who published a lot of very interesting partimenti. And Mattei was the teacher of Donizetti and Rossini, but not of Verdi, who was a Neapolitan as formation. And there was there's a big difference between the Neapolitan and the Bolognese tradition. First of all, most of, or almost all, as far as I remember, Bolognese partimenti are fully figured, like German partimenti, for example. And so the tradition of Neapolitan partimenti is to figure as little as they can. Bolognese are totally figured. And there are some kind of progression they don't use much. And generally speaking, the style is quite different.
Now, a few words on Jean-Philippe Rameau, who's arguably known for his theories on fundamental bass. Now, did he have an influence on the Neapolitan Conservatories? I know Partimenti and fundamental bass they're different, but did that seep in some way, much like the German tradition seeped in the mid-19th century?
Of course, Rameau was enormously influential, and he had a great name also in Naples, but his influence arrived quite lately. So I'd say at the beginning of the 19th century, we have some mention of the name of Rameau or the theory, the fundamental base in some Neapolitan partimenti collection. But I have the idea that, for example, Trito, I have the idea that they mention Rameau just for a matter of duty. So they felt compelled to mention Rameau.
Okay.
But they were not really so interested in Rameau, or their difficulty to complement the Partimento with Rameau fundamental bass or inversion theory. They did in some way, but they made some very funny things. For example, they considered that there was an interesting theorist, Selvaggi, Gaspare Selvaggi, I think that was the name, who wrote a treatise on harmony, and he applied the theory of chordal inversion, but to the rule of the octave. So the chord of the rule of the octave were considered a fundamental position, and the inversion of the chord were considered inversion. So, for example, on the second degree of the rule of the octave, you have 3/4, 6 chord, and this is a fundamental chord. And then the triad, what we called in root position, was considered an inversion.
Well, can I ask you a question about a rule of the octave and fundamental chords? So, now and today we learn about triads, and every bass note in the key has a specific triad. How is the rule of the octave different from fundamental chords?
Enormously different. One thing is that Neapolitan, they never considered single chord as material of music. They always considered at least a succession or a progression of 3 chords. So the simplest harmonic entity in the Neapolitan theory is the cadenza semplice, which is made by a opening tonic, a middle dominant, and the closing tonic. Then from here they progressed forward to more complicated cadences, and the arrival point is the rule of the octave. The rule of the octave is the paradigm of tonality for the Partimento theory, and there's nothing to do with triads. So what I want to say is that they never wrote or considered the single chord as a significant entity in tonal music, but always at least a succession of 3 chords. And it doesn't matter if they are triad or they are not triad, it is the same. They were considered, they said consonanze, but what is funny is that for them consonanze or are not consonances, but they are the chord of the rule of the octave. So in the rule of the octave, you have also very dissonant chord, for example, the 2-4-6 chord. Well, they are consonances because they are part of the most important paradigm of tonal music. It's a completely different perspective.
You have uncovered some actual realizations of Partimenti. How rare are these realizations, and what conclusions should we draw from them?
They are rare, even though in the few 2 or 3 years, some more has been discovered. When I wrote my book I published it in 2012, and my research was concluded about 2010. So it is updated up to 2010. And there were only 2 original realizations, for sure, belonging to the 18th century, both of them of Durante Partimenti, and one is in Rome, in the Library of Archaeology and History of Art in Rome, and one is in the monastery of Grotta Ferrata, near to Rome. The difference is, they look more like a very flamboyant and virtuoso harpsichord sonata by Scarlatti than to a Bach chorale. They are virtuoso pieces, so it has nothing to do with what we think about a figure bass. When we at school, when we realize a figure bass in 4 voices with just chords and they keep the chords moving very smoothly, they're nothing like that. They are virtuoso pieces. So I guess that, yes, for the evidence we have, the aspect of virtuoso writing, of diminution, of I don't remember the name of that, but the fact that the instrumental style was very important.
Speaking of diminution, we have some examples of diminution exercises, but is that traditionally an oral way of disseminating it to students? How is a student supposed to learn diminution?
Yes, I think that they did this in 2 ways. One is the way they learned counterpoint. We have some notebooks of counterpoint exercises, and one is by Verdi's teacher, Vincenzo Lavigna, and is currently housed in the library of the Conservatory of Milan. So they started with pages and pages and pages of diminution on the cadenza. So on opening tonic, middle dominant, and closing tonic. And they started in 2 voices, first with whole notes, then when half notes, then quarter notes, and then writing more elaborated diminution. Then they did the same thing in 3 voices, then in 4 voices. So diminution was taught in counterpoint and also in Partimento. Think, for example, the so-called figurati partimenti of Durante. So Durante gives you the unfigured bass, and then 2 or 3 or maybe 4 examples of diminution. So he tells you, you can use this style. Use the word style, not diminution. This diminution, or this, or this, or this, and then you have to continue. I think the diminution is extremely important thing for Partimento playing, because it has a great importance. Could have a great importance for today performers. And this is another important topic. So the importance of Partimento in the current musical life and the current musical teaching.
You also mentioned another important thing, which is imitation. And so how is imitation important in the Partimento tradition?
Oh, very. The arrival point of Partimento course was fugue. So obviously you had to learn imitation before attempting to improvise a fugue on a Partimento. Partimenti could be written, unwritten, just guessed, and so one of the most important thing about about imitation in Partimento is the way you have to recognize or identify two bass segments and that are in relationship of double or invertible counterpoint. So you have this bass line and you have a theme, let's call it theme, or a melody of 2, 3, or 4 bars, and then you have a different melody. So at a certain point, at the beginning, you don't realize that there are something special in those melodies, but when you're experienced, you start to realize that the two melodies can be superimposed, so they're in double counterpoint relation, and very often one of the melody is fast moving and interesting, and the other melody is slow moving and not so interesting. So what you have to do is put the interesting thing on the not so interesting thing, and vice versa. And you don't need to have some special sign like saying, oh, this is an imitation here. No, you have to find out yourself.
Let's actually now talk about pedagogy. I'm really interested in your thoughts on how we can take this really important information and change music education. So let's say if I were a parent and I had a kid who was not exposed to, I could start fresh with Partimento. How would you start to plot that journey for that child's music education?
Well, starting from the easiest Partimenti, of course, the cadences or cadenze, and then start with the rule-of-the-octave, and then move to the bass motion, the regular bass motion, sequences or not sequences, and moving slowly and playing instead of writing. So this is important. So it's not a written exercise. It's performance. It's improvisation. And of course, this is quite easy if you have a keyboard student. It is difficult when you have a non-keyboard student. I mean, guitar is okay, but I had to teach a Partimento to drummers, and not easy at all. But teaching Partimento is not so uncommon today. The many conservatories, many colleges, many music schools that teach Partimento now. So it's not so uncommon, and I think that will be more common in the years to come. And when my book is quite scholarly, I know, but now there are this Job Giserman book, which is more apt to current teaching, and I think that more books will come out in the future. So it's going to become a more common way, and you can teach a lot of things with Partimento, not just harmony or counterpoint, but also I insist on a thing that Partimento should not be confined to early music player. So it's obvious that a harpsichord player with a sound education in third bass can play Partimento with his. This is obvious. But I think that Partimento can be extremely useful for classical pianists, for romantic pianists, what the fortepiano player called the black pianist, so because the instrument is black. And because of the constraint of the work of art regime, so you can play a music written and you can change a single note in a Beethoven piano sonata or in a Mozart piano sonata because you are guilty of some horrible mistake. So you don't have to change anything. And this is good, of course, because we gain the respect for text, which is extremely important. But the flip side of the coin is that most classical performers are just stuck and terrifying to do anything that is not written or memorized. And this could be a problem, I think, but not because you have to play Beethoven piano sonata with some word fancy, embellishment, but because you can you miss the fluency of speaking a language.
Well, didn't Beethoven, wasn't he a subscriber to a famous compendium of treatises that basically were a summation of Italian treatises?
He was a subscriber, but there's some discussion about it. You mean Choron, the 3 volumes, Choron 3 volumes.
That's right.
Yes, he was one of the subscribers, but the book was never found in his library or in any document concerning his library. So someone think that he really didn't own the book. But I think that he gave the permission to write his name in the list of subscribers. Anyway, he was obviously a great improviser and probably know about Partimenti because in Vienna, Italian Partimenti were quite common. And and in addition, the problem of that great number, a fair number of 18th century music is written in an incomplete notation. So it's not fully written. Think of a Handel harpsichord suite, or even Mozart piano concertos. The concerto Mozart wrote for himself, not for some other pianist, and the piano part is very sketchy, and it needs to be completed. So we know this since 1 century. But the problem is that you don't know how to do it, because if what you can do is just to play some scales or some chromatic scale or some embellishment, well, so keep the music as it's written because it's better. But if you can do something more interesting, well, it's worth trying, let's say. So, and how can you learn diminution? So this kind of diminution that you can apply even to some Mozart music, I think, through Partimenti.
Now, you mentioned that nowadays a lot of schools have started to teach Partimento, and I'm sure a lot of people consult you about learning Partimento. What are some common mistakes you find when someone is trying to learn Partimento?
One common mistake is that they want to jump. The more gifted musician, they try to jump to the third phase of the realization without thinking very well on the first phase. I try to explain myself better.
Very quickly, what are the phases?
Yes, Fenaroli mentioned 2 phases. One is with simple consonances. It means by simple consonances, when you have a Partimento in front of you, the first thing you have to do is to figure out what the basic harmony structure is. So just play the chords, just try to figure out what the basic chords are. And secondly, you have to add, Fenaroli said, you have to add the dissonances. And by dissonances, Fenaroli means the suspensions. And because it was the only kind of dissonance they recognized, passing and neighboring note were part of diminution. A student of Fenaroli, Guarnaccia, added a third stage, and the third stage was diminution and imitation. So I think that this is a very wise way to realize Partimenti. So first of all, you have to think about the chordal structure, and then you have to add the suspension when it is the case, and diminution and imitation. So this is the thing you have to do. I'm discovering now that I'm preparing a master class in Sbarano, which will take place in northern Italy, will take place in 2 days. And so I'm working about the material I'm giving them to my student, and I'm still discovering that the kind of diminution you want to choose may influence the structure. So that's a thing that I discovered quite recently. So it's not entirely true that the diminution is the last stage and it is some kind of, something added above. But the choice of diminution may also influence the structure. This is an interesting thing that I need to work out a little bit more.
Now, your book was released in 2012. Since it's now 2019, what new things have you discovered since your book has been released?
Oh, a lot of things, a lot of things. One of the most important thing is that in my book, I wrote, based on the evidence I had, that the possible origin of Partimento was in Rome, because at that time, the oldest surviving Partimento collection with the name of the author and more or less a date were those by Bernardo Pasquini. And Pasquini, so I tried to reconstruct the story of Pasquini working in Rome at the court of the Queen Christina of Sweden, and in this fantastic environment, a very exciting place when he worked together with Arcangelo Corelli and with Alessandro Scarlatti and with young Handel. So they devised this very sophisticated and highly professional notational system, so just for insiders. And after that, the young Alessandro Scarlatti, when he moved to Naples, because he accepted the position of teaching in Naples, he thought that maybe this new kind of style of notation could be used for teaching too. A few years later, a manuscript came out in the Library of Paris of an amazing series of partimenti written by a Neapolitan composer, Francesco Mancini, and with a date, and the date is 1669. So we have now the evidence that partimenti existed in Naples before Rome, and still counting. I mean, and another very amazing discovery was that the output of partimenti of Alessandro Scarlatti was limited to 2 or 3 dozens, I think, and scattered in different manuscripts. And after my book came out, a huge manuscript was found in the library of Hamburg in northern Germany, and was some 300 partimenti by Scarlatti. And they are not obviously, I don't speak about them. So a lot of things came out, and now I'm working at not a revised edition, but a corrected edition, because there are some mistakes in my 2012 edition, but with a new preface. And the new preface, I will account for all this new discovery, and the book will be a paperback, so less expensive than the original edition.
You're a professor of music. You've taught music analysis for a long time. Personally, how do you think people should analyze music?
Should analyze music? Well, today the landscape of music analysis is totally different from the landscape in which I grew up. So, a formal point of view, now we have the Galant schemata theory, and which complements very well with Partimento theory, and so there are these thoughts. What I mean is there's not a single perspective, as it used to be in the 80s or in the 90s of the previous century. But we have to adapt for every piece a different perspective that could point out something that is relevant from the point of cultural history. So it's not just reverse engineering of the piece of music. When you analyze a piece of music, you have to say something important about also the cultural history of this music. That's what I'm doing now. So I don't think that music analysis is just a matter of, you take a piece of music, you say, oh, this is so and so and so and so. It has to be to do with, yes, the cultural history, its position in the era in which it was written. I think that is to complement the musicology with music theory. This is what has been doing now. For example, there are fabulous books came out in the recent, for example, a Mozart Musical Friend by Edward Clorman, and he's doing exactly the thing I'm doing. I'm trying to explain. So, music analysis not for itself, but for the understanding of a piece of music in a larger perspective.
I want to ask you about just the place of these important Neapolitan composers. We're very German-centric in the way we think about classical music nowadays. Everybody knows about Mozart. Everybody knows about Bach. Who are some Neapolitan or just Italian composers that really should be on that same level in when we talk about great composers?
Yes, I think that is Leonardo Leo. Leonardo Leo is one of the most amazing composers, and it was more or less the same generation of Bach. And his music is almost totally unknown today, is still to discover. And he was really an amazing composer.
What was so amazing about him?
Fabulous counterpoint, great melodic invention, poignancy of expression. He's a great composer.
And a few more. Give me a few more.
Oh, well, Alessandro Scarlatti is for one. And Durante was still a great composer. But my point, when I wrote this book, I thought to the Neapolitan tradition more as a global tradition. So not just a name, not just a single composer, but is a over-personal tradition. And I think, if I give you one more names, I can point out, for example, Gaetano Veneziano or Francesco Provenzale. They're all great musicians, all of them.
Well, there's a famous musician, the opera composer Vincenzo Bellini. He was greatly admired by Chopin, Liszt, even Richard Wagner. He's a product of the Neapolitan tradition. I think his first teacher was Furno.
Yes, Bellini he studied and graduated from the Conservatory of Naples, and he studied with Furno. He studied with Zingarelli and with Trito too, I think. And he graduated with an opera, his first opera in the Conservatory of Naples. And yes, it's totally approved, but also Verdi. Verdi was totally Neapolitan in his formation. You know that Verdi was refused admission to the Conservatory of Milan.
Really?
So he applied to the Conservatory of Milan, and there was an exam, and he was refused admission. So he had to study with a private teacher, and this private teacher was Vincenzo Lavigna, who was a student of Fenaroli. So Verdi was a proud student of the Neapolitan tradition of Durante, Fenaroli, and he acknowledged that. I mean, he was absolutely happy about that.
The great Dr. Giorgio Sanguinetti, I mean, I have a final question for you. If you were to put in charge of music education for the world, what reforms would you enact? What sort of things would you emphasize or stress?
Oh, man. Well, I don't know. I would probably introduce a more practical way of learning music theory and music analysis with hands-on. And so not just write down, no Roman numerals or something like that, but try to play, to improvise, and to speak the same language the tonal composers spoke. So, yes, I think that this is the most important thing I can think about. There are many others, of course, but since we are speaking about Partimento, I think that, that's the same thing I will do.
So your book, you're releasing a new revised edition. Do you have any other upcoming projects you'd like to mention?
Well, I wrote many articles in the meanwhile, and one is on Bellini, and Bellini in Norma borrowed a fragment of Beethoven Moonlight Sonatas. So I'm trying to figure out why he did so and for what reason. I'm currently working at a book on Beethoven Piano Sonatas, and it is the first volume of a 5-volume series published in Italy by the Society of Musicology. And in this book, I try is an introduction to Beethoven Piano Sonata. And I try to introduce this unbelievably complicated topic from the point of view of different from genre and form. So why it's so important that we place Beethoven Piano Sonata in the right context and in the in the context for which they have been written, composed, and performed. So this is my work, the work I'm doing it right now.
Wonderful. Well, the great Dr. Giorgio Sanguinetti, what a treat it's been to be able to talk to you today. Thank you so much for taking the time to share your expertise on this very important subject. To my audience, you simply must buy his fantastic book, The Art of Partimento by Oxford University Press. Dr. Sanguinetti, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you to you very much. Thank you. Very happy to be here.